Before I begin, I would like to make a little correction to my previous podcast called Introduction. My beloved wife Shauna pointed this out to me, and it's something I must have incorrectly thought for years, because it never crossed my mind. I said that I got married when I was 19. That is incorrect. I was actually 20 at the time of our wedding. The date of our wedding was August 19th of 2012. My 20th birthday was August 14th of 2012. So in fact, I turned 25 days before my wedding. Now that I have clarified that, let's hop right into the good stuff. Spirituality. Hello, and welcome to my podcast called Faith is Strength. My name is Nuchy, and I am speaking out of Earmont, New York. If you would like to learn a little bit more about me or this series, please listen to my introduction podcast, which was posted on SoundCloud and on YouTube on December 29, 2016. Or you can visit my website, faithisstrength.com. This podcast is being recorded January 15th of 2017. The title of today's topic is The Fundamentals of Jewish Spirituality. Think of it as Kosher Spirituality / basic Jewish philosophy. The groundwork that I'm about to lay out is by no means on a first grade comprehension level, so I suggest you buckle up for the ride. In order to effectively approach spirituality and glean excellence from its many practices and teachings, it is of utmost importance that we formulate an accurate picture in our mind of what spirituality really is. Why? Because jumping into spiritual practices with improper guidance or from non-kosher sources can often lead to misconceptions and confusion. Worse than that, it can even lead to heresy or deep-rooted anger and negativity, heaven forbid. So before I jump into my literal definition of the term spirituality, we are going to take a road trip through the various areas of knowledge and beliefs that led up to our evolved term that I currently use, spirituality. I'm going to organize and list each area of knowledge and find its place in Jewish thought. By doing this, we will be able to derive a very accurate understanding of what Jewish spirituality is. This is a very important first step. By avoiding to learn and understand the full structure, we may fall into pits down the road that will prove to be too difficult for our own brains to get out of. This, as I've mentioned above, may lead to misconceptions or even worse, anger. So without further ado, I'll get right into it. Let's begin to break down the fundamentals of Jewish spirituality. I'm going to build a comprehensive foundation that is understood and defined. Number 1 on our list is existence. As we are born into this world, two things are apparent right away: life and existence. Let's work with existence first. Existence is commonly held to be that which objectively persists independent of one's presence, meaning that even if you were not born, existence would still be, even though it may be true that you would not know about it had you never been born. The extent of this existence becomes a burden for the deep thinker right away. You may start to wonder what exists. How far-reaching is existence? What is existence? How does anything exist? The list of questions that grow out of this first notion alone are endless. But we will begin to get a clearer picture as we progress with the series. Every item on this list may spark many questions as above, but in order to stay on topic, I'm going to refrain from raising these questions myself. Instead, I will continue to create the list and see if your questions aren't automatically answered by the time we are through. Okay? Great. So according to Judaism, the above notion of existence is true. We also believe that God constricted from his own essence in order for a vacated space to be available for the location and creation of our physical world. In other words, this world, your friends and family, stars and galaxies, all that you see and don't, exists, with or without your soul being down here to know about it from a physical perspective. You may be wondering, of course it's true. Why wouldn't it be? Well, believe it or not, there are beliefs held by some philosophers that question the dependency of existence. Some believe that existence is subjective. We will get to that one day. So number one again is the belief that existence persists independent of one's presence. Judaism agrees. As it says in Genesis, God created the world. There's no mention of life yet. I would conclude from that existence of the physical world is not subjective. Number two is life. Life is the second thing that becomes obvious after we are born. Life is the condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, including the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death. Right? We all of a sudden find ourselves in existence with a body that is alive. We would have to be crazy to deny life and existence. So there again, Judaism agrees that physical life is real. As it says, God created Adam's body out of dust. Judaism also believes that physical life is the conduit by which we can experience godliness on a practical level. Number three is matter. We find ourselves plunged into existence with a body that is alive and kicking. This body is made out of solid stuff. The floor I'm standing on seems to be solid stuff, as well as the tree growing out of the ground. All appears to be really solid stuff. All this stuff that we see is matter. Everything physical that has mass and takes up space is considered matter. According to Judaism, matter is real. As is written in the Talmud and in the Zohar, Chomer v'tzura, Chomer referring to matter. But we add to that the belief that God is the power and life source in matter, in everything. Number four is this world. Once we establish local matter, we realize that matter extends to really far places. And now, with modern science, we presume to have pretty accurate units of measure for the size and capacity of the physical universe. Judaism has no beef with how far-stretching the universe is. In fact, Jewish sages were often very into pondering the depths of this universe. Again, this falls under the same creation of existence that we believe God did as explained in Bereshis. Number five is atoms. Once we establish that matter is real and far-reaching, we must wonder what all this matter is made up of. That's where we get to atoms. An atom is the smallest constituent of ordinary matter that has the properties of a chemical element. Every solid, liquid, gas, and plasma is composed of neutral or ionized atoms. This understanding of the physical is thanks to modern science and technology, and seems to align without a hiccup with God's creation of the world. But here too we must stress that we believe that God is the power and life source in atoms, in everything. Number six is the mind. After we are tired of pondering the vastness of physical matter, we realize that there must exist a set of cognitive faculties including consciousness, perception, thinking, judgment, and memory that is powering our mental experience, which brings us to the mind or consciousness. You know, that light bulb which seems to take up no space and have the ability to think of just about anything? Yeah, that weird element. There are strong indications in Jewish literature that connects our consciousness with our soul. In other words, consciousness is a separate element from our body. It is the very essence that makes us, us. In this respect, one may think that Judaism believes in dualism, which is the position that mental phenomena are, in some respects, non-physical, or that the mind and body are not identical. However, even though from a practical perspective we believe in dualism, It is important to note that from a philosophical perspective we don't. I don't mean to create an apparent contradiction. I just want to point that out, as we will touch on it a bit later. Again, Judaism believes in the mind or consciousness. We also believe that the mind is a distinct entity from the physical body. Number 7 is spirit, otherwise known as soul or the neshama. As we have just finished with the mind, you already know that we believe in a spirit or a soul, because I mentioned it. As it says in Genesis, God blew a spirit of life into his nostrils. So of course Judaism believes in the soul. On top of that, we believe that the soul is a piece of Hashem, literally. As it says, Chelek Elokai Mima'al, eternal and limitless, just like God. Number 8 is God. After we've formulated all these beautiful ideas, none of it makes sense without a creator. Judaism is one of the oldest traditions with a belief of God. There's no need to elaborate much on this point. In general, Judaism views the existence of God as a necessary prerequisite for the existence of the universe. The existence of the universe is sufficient proof for the existence of God, and of course there are many, many more philosophical reasons why we believe in God, but now is not the time for that. Number 9 is creation, other dimensions, evil. Since we believe in God, we believe that God created everything. And when I say everything, I mean all that we can see and not see, all that exists. Every thought, nature, the universe, animals, the sun, everything. Amongst these awesome and wonderful creations, Judaism believes in some unique items created, such as the evil inclination, spiritual worlds, divine providence, emunah, free will, and many other amazing things. You may be thinking, wait, divine providence and emunah are not creations, but they sure are, and we will loop back to that later in this series. The reason I'm specifically mentioning these select items will find its relevance later on in our series. The bottom line is that we believe God created everything other than himself, which we believe to be eternal. Number 10 is a personal God. But before I elaborate on this item on my list, allow me to clarify what I mean by a personal God. Because if you were to look up the term personal God online, you will get something along these lines. A personal God is a deity who can be related to us as a person instead of as an impersonal force, such as the absolute, the all, or the one. But when I say personal God, I'm not referring to this at all. Judaism absolutely rejects this English version of the term personal God. That is, we do not believe that God is human-like. Jewish theology states that God is not a person. However, there exist frequent references to anthropomorphic characteristics of God in the Hebrew Bible, such as the hand of God. Judaism holds that these are to be taken only as figures of speech. Their purpose is to make God more comprehensible to the human reader. As God is beyond human understanding, there are different ways of describing him. He is said to be both personal and impersonal. He has a relationship with his creation, but is beyond all relationships. So, I'm speaking from a standpoint that already established that God is not physical and cannot be referred to by physical features. With that in mind, yes, Judaism believes in a personal God, meaning a God who hears our prayer, a God that relates to us, but in a spiritual way entirely. We don't think God needs to have physical features in order to hear our prayers. We don't need the English version of a personal God in order for God to relate to us. We believe that our spiritual God can hear us just fine. However, there is some opposition and dispute regarding this item on our list. Maimonides, as well as some other Jewish thinkers, post-Aristotle, raise some very strong questions about the belief in a personal God. But since the overwhelming majority of Jews believe in my description of a personal God, I'm not going to get into the philosophy behind Maimonides' uncertainty. It is something that I am very much interested to expound upon, but we will leave that for another time. In summary, majority of religious Jews believe in a personal God, as well as the majority of all major religions. Number 11 is pantheism. Pantheism, which was popularized or started by Baruch Spinoza, a Jewish Dutch philosopher who lived at around 1650, was rejected by Judaism. In fact, they put him in cherem. His idea and the definition of pantheism is the belief that all of reality is identical with divinity and nothing more. The reason it's an automatic decline for Judaism is because of the belief in pantheism that there is nothing beyond the universe. True, God is the power and life source in everything we believe, including this universe, but we also believe and have strong traditions that God is beyond this universe as well. As the Baal HaTanya puts it, Mimale kol almin, which means he fills all worlds, and soivev kol almin, which means he surrounds all worlds. And considering pantheism rejects the God beyond, the God that surrounds and is infinite, we reject it. But there is an ulterior motive for my mentioning this item on my list. I have often found articles or excerpts circling Facebook and other Jewish groups that contain ideas born out of pantheism. Since people aren't intimately familiar with this area of knowledge, Jews naturally find its ideas appealing, like God hears through our ears and sees through our eyes. Beliefs as such are pantheistic type of beliefs. We need to be cautious with such ideas because they can easily undermine God's omnipotence. God does not need our eyes to see or our ears to hear. Pantheism undermines qualities that we've been attributing to God for thousands of years. Thus, Judaism does not agree with it. Be aware. Number 12 is monism. Monism is the view that attributes oneness or singleness to a concept, or existence in our case. Hearing the word oneness in conjunction with our deeply engraved education of the word echad, which means one, should right away make you feel at home. Not so fast. Firstly, by saying that Judaism believes in a certain type of monism, I may instantly spark some adversaries or perhaps throw you into some sort of confusion. As you may know, monism seems to be in direct contradiction with dualism. So how can Judaism agree with both? Secondly, Judaism never fully integrated with the term monism, so it may simply be an uncomfortable space for some. But I'm not here to create comfort. I'm here to point out the fundamentals of kosher spirituality and share my knowledge. First things first, I will venture to say that Judaism absolutely believes in some form of monism. But this is on a very fundamental level. What do I mean? Well, when we have discussions about anything profound, we need to establish whether we are talking from a philosophical or practical standpoint, because that will determine whether the reasoning is logic and coherent. So when I say that Judaism believes in a certain form of monism on a fundamental level, I'm referring to the philosophical/spiritual reality, the ultimate truth, not the practical, not the physical. But when I was talking about dualism, I was talking from a practical standpoint. Now, if you understand the significance of what I just said, you will already understand why the belief in dualism and the belief in monism is no contradiction after all. Now is not the time for me to elaborate on these distinctions and philosophical ideas too much, but I surely will one day, just in case you have not fully grasped its significance and placement in Jewish thought. It'll be my pleasure to clarify this point abundantly when I get to it. The conclusion here for number 12 is that Judaism believes in a certain form of monism. Monism is already broken into many types, and I don't think Judaism fits any perfectly as per the English definition, but they are all similar in character, so I'm not going to get very picky. What does matter is that we believe in Echad, which means one, or Eino Mavadoi, which means there is none or no one but Him. Bottom line, God is a unity. He is a single, whole, complete, indivisible entity. He cannot be divided into parts or described by attributes. Any attempt to ascribe attributes to God is merely man's imperfect attempt to understand the infinite, which is indescribable. Judaism believes in monism. Number 13 is Amunah, also known as the complete and unwavering faith in one loving God. The three principles of this faith are as follows. 1. God does absolutely everything. Number 2. Everything that God does is for a reason and has a purpose. And number 3. Everything God does is for our ultimate good. These principles come from Jewish outlook and create a very fundamental bedrock for how we approach all situations in our life. Learning these principles are of utmost importance. I would suggest it to every human being walking planet Earth. You can learn about these principles by buying the book called The Garden of Amunah, which was written for Jews, or The Universal Garden of Amunah, which was written for non-Jews. This book will absolutely change your life. Moving on. Number 14 is prayer and meditation. Through prayer and meditation, one can reach inner peace, overcome obstacles, get closer, or even bind to the Creator, and many more things. Judaism is huge on this and absolutely agrees. Number 15 is monotheism. Monotheism is the belief in one God or the oneness of God. Judaism is believed to be by the Jews as the father of monotheism. Whether that is correct or not, we certainly believe that its definition is true, so at least there's that. Indeed, we proclaim God's oneness more than 3 times a day. Number 16 is the Torah, tradition, culture, direction, and outlook. After we have a grasp of all the various ideas and beliefs that got us this far, we are left with one daunting task: what to do with it. What do we do with all of our aforementioned beliefs? That's where the Torah comes into play. The Jews were already a people, but they had no laws. We believe that God gave us the Torah, which is the Old Testament, on Mount Sinai in front of all the Jews. It was a mass revelation unparalleled to this very day. From the Torah we derive laws, outlook, direction, meaning, hope, and hundreds of other details concerning thousands of areas of our lives. We believe that secrets and knowledge were passed down from father to son for a certain duration of time until we began writing and documenting. This is what we refer to as the Torah Sheba'al Peh, meaning the Torah that is spoken, or the oral Torah. By now we have thousands of teachings derived from thousands of other teachings which ultimately link back to the Torah. Since we believe that God gave us the Torah, we consequently believe that it is a holy scroll containing millions of secrets open to interpretation. This cycle or rotation of knowledge and commentary creates a handful of complexities for the pondering Jew of the 21st century, which is exactly why I'm approaching this whole topic from a new angle: spirituality. Because there are so many books quoting so many other books, we have ourselves a cobweb of kosher spiritual knowledge. My approach seeks to alleviate the pondering soul, who seems to be getting entangled in the intricacy of the spiritual web. I will delicately approach each topic from the basics, as my beloved spiritual guide Laser Brody says. When things aren't working out or making sense anymore, we need to go back to the basics and start over. This completes my list of fundamental ideas pertaining to kosher spirituality. It is important to know that there are obviously an untold amount of other elements that comprise the full spectrum of spiritual thought. The short list above is what I deemed fundamental. Things like spiritual laws, spiritual rules, ideas, and personal accounts are all very relevant as well, but those will blossom throughout the series. I tried to only mention the bedrock of Jewish belief, and besides for the gray area about a personal God, every Jewish religious sect would have to agree with all the other items on this list. It is pretty much universally accepted by all Jews. Now that I have broken the fundamentals of spirituality into a comprehensible list, I'm going to move to the term spirituality and break that down. When I'm done, you will understand why these two steps were an important part for laying the groundwork for spirituality prior to the approach. I will begin with a question. What is spirituality? And more importantly, what do I mean by spirituality? Since I'm going to be using this term quite often in this series, I find it necessary to take the time to give you a thorough explanation as to what I mean and what I am referring to when I use the term spirituality. To fully explain my definition of spirituality, I'm going to draw on Wikipedia and then add commentary on top of that. I believe that they are pretty on mark with their definition, but a bit too precise. I'll take the liberty to expound on their definition. Here it is. The following excerpt is from Wikipedia. Traditionally, spirituality refers to a religious process of reformation which aims to recover the original shape of man, oriented at the image of God, as exemplified by the founders and sacred texts of the religions of the world. In modern times, the emphasis is on subjective experience of a sacred dimension and the deepest values and meanings by which people live, often in a context separate from organized religious institutions. Modern spirituality typically includes a belief in a supernatural realm, personal growth, a quest for an ultimate sacred meaning, religious experience, or an encounter with one's own inner dimension. That concludes my quotation of Wikipedia. The first sentence that I want to expound upon is the following. In modern times, the emphasis is on subjective experience of a sacred dimension. This is concise, but what does it mean? Well, subjective experience of a sacred dimension is basically referring to our accumulated experiences of the non-physical. This, in practical terms, means that if I pray and then receive what I pray for, or don't, my subjective experience will be just that. That is, the practice and the outcome of my prayers, as well as my whole experience during and after the practice. So there's this aspect of individual subjective experience. Spirituality refers to anything non-physical. Any practice, trick, or tool that isn't strictly physical must have a spiritual relationship. Now, considering most things are, from a philosophical perspective, connected with the spiritual, we come to understand and interact with our entire physical life from a spiritual standpoint. By this definition, everything becomes spiritual, and we do not concern ourselves too much with the strictly physical, if there even exists such a thing. The reason for this is because we believe that the physical is merely a reflection, manifestation, or a symptom of the spiritual, a mere outcome. That means that any ideas that aren't strictly physical have a spiritual element to it. And when we choose to talk about and focus on those spiritual elements, we are in essence talking about spirituality. An example of this would be when someone is sick and they decide to pray instead of visiting a doctor. Whether that is wise or not is a topic for another time, but that is what it means to focus on the spiritual and not the physical. The next emphasis would be on this quote, deepest values and meanings by which people live. Why is that? Because values and meanings are not physical things. And as I just explained, anything that isn't strictly physical must have a spiritual dimension to it, like values and meanings. So as you can see, my definition of spirituality includes anything that is viewed upon, analyzed, or approached with an eye mindful of the spiritual dimension. Another way for me to put this in a nutshell would be to say that spirituality is a term that incorporates all of our philosophies regarding the non-physical. Again, spirituality is a term that incorporates all of our philosophies regarding the non-physical. Now, how do we connect my list of spiritual fundamentals to this understanding of the term spirituality? It's very simple. Since my list consisted mostly of non-physical elements and rooted in deep philosophical thought, consequently, whenever we are talking about most items on that list, or even its derivatives, you will hear things like spiritually speaking, or from a spiritual perspective, so on and so forth. If this is still not very clear to you, don't sweat it. With time and persistence, the actual topics and discussions will help you build your own deep understanding of what spirituality means to you. Because as I mentioned, this is how I use the term spirituality. Every individual learning about God and life will ultimately formulate their own meaning and understanding of spirituality. Now that we've flown through 5,000 years of ideas and we've come to mingle all of it into one word, join me for my next podcast where we will begin to ready ourselves to trek the journey of spirituality in good health and consistency. The next podcast will be called Approaching Spirituality with Balance. And I'm sure that if you enjoyed this, you will love that as well. It will be a bit lighter on the philosophy and a tad heavier on the practical spiritual advice. Thank you so much for tuning in for this awesome piece of work. I hope you understood all of my points well. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me via my website at faithisstrength.com. You will get a response within 48 hours. Until next time, God bless.